if I were to go back to that 31-year-old and let her know the life that I'm living now, it's emotional to think about because I would have been able to tell her that anxiety is not an issue, that I was able to find beautiful answers on what was actually going on with me. I would probably sit right next to her and hold her right in the emergency room and let her know you are okay. If you are looking to move forward in your life towards your authentic dreams without sacrificing your emotional health, your nervous system, your relationships, or your spiritual health, well, you are in good company. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is a safe space for creatives. This is the Heal Create podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. I am your host, Courtney, and I want to give just a bit of a trigger warning for this episode and just say I'm just going to talk about panic attacks and my own story because it is actually the 10-year anniversary, I guess. Yeah, it's been 10 years since I experienced my first panic attack. And I'm not going to get too deep into it. I just want to give you a heads up that I'm just going to be talking about it. And with a lot of good news attached to it as well, because even though that was a part of my story and it was very scary as panic attacks are, it has been the thing that has been somewhat of a North Star for me, figuring out how to resolve it over the years and then helping other people resolve their anxiety now, which is such a gift and, a thing that I never thought would happen 10 years ago when I was in the emergency room with panic attacks. If you want to hear my story, there is a podcast episode, I think it's from season 1, where Emily and I talk about my history with anxiety, my healing journey story. And before I get into it, I want to say one of the things, you guys already know this if you listen, one of the things that kind of pulled me out of healing and into transformation, into growth, post-traumatic growth, was this idea that I could actually design the life that I want. And that to me was never offered as an option. I just not like the opposite was true. I wasn't anyone's slave. I just didn't know that I was allowed to build the life that I wanted to build. I just thought you kind of go with the flow and you do what you're supposed to do. And so about 4 or 5 years after I began really wrestling with panic attacks, and over those first 4 or 5 years, I had gone to all kinds of therapists. I was trying to cope with it. I was trying to deal with it as best I could. I remember reading a book that asked the question, you guys know it by now, what are 10 things you'd like to say are true for your life 10 years from now? And it is, that is another North Star question for me in general. If I'm ever struggling with a particular area of my life, parenting, health, marriage, friendships, all the things that we're all wrestling with and growing through, I will ask myself, okay, what's the best case scenario for this particular area of my life? And I think when we're talking about life design, I'm not white knuckling that outcome. I'm not like, because if it doesn't happen, I won't be okay. I'm giving myself a new vision to focus on. I'm setting my sights on something that could happen. As long as I'm ruminating on what could happen and what could go wrong, then I might as well give my brain something, a positive thing that could happen, and then work towards that. Knowing that if it doesn't work out, it's because it's, God is leading me to something better. And that has obviously been, maybe obvious, maybe not obvious, just an absolute life-changing mindset. Life-changing. But it started with the question, what are 10 things you'd like to say are true about your life 10 years from now? And it's interesting because I ask that question to every client that I start with. We really go through this and we really build out and design, the life of your particular authenticity, your dreams, your personality, your however God designed you specifically to be. We want to see what would that version of you dream of and design for herself and her life. So because I ask that question to everyone. I think about it a lot. And I think about, I'm always thinking about like 10 years from now, 10 years from now. It's just part of my like mental pattern now. But the truth is, when I started asking that question, I am now living in most of the things that, it's just crazy to say, most of the things that I wrote down when I started writing down my own personal answers to this. I would write it down every day. Actually, Rachel Hollis had a specific journal just for writing down the 10 things you want to say are true about your life 10 years from now. And so I started writing them down every day. And it is really crazy to say that I am living in a lot of those things that I wrote down that didn't even feel possible, didn't even feel like they were realistic for me at the time. This is, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And what so I will say that like that idea is at least helpful to think about. What could go right? What would I love to say is true about my life in the future? What could I build if anything was possible? That is actually a very mentally healthy thing to think and to practice thinking. But I will also say that it actually does work. And work as in you do end up living out the reality that you focus on in one way or another. So this idea of 10 years is, I don't know, I guess it's become kind of precious to me. And it's just a really powerful way to move forward in your life. And even as I'm getting more into studying, I'm in a certification program right now, and I'm studying, dopamine and how it's the desire chemical that like motivates you to seek a reward. And how important that is. I mean, just for us, the motivation to move towards something beautiful, and how we can overdo it on dopamine, which that'll be another episode. As I'm getting into like understanding all the hormones and all the chemicals and all the biological reasons why we do what we do, it's like even more evident to me how important it is for us to have a vision for our life, or as the Bible says, or the people perish. I was perishing. I felt like I was perishing. And what's crazy is 10 years ago, I was a completely different person. It makes me emotional to think about. I was a completely different person. And the seeds of who I am now are obviously there and are there in each of you to become the most authentic version of yourselves. And I'm obviously still on a journey as well. But the reason why I want to share a little bit about my story and talk about anxiety in particular is because I know what it's like. And I want you guys to know, and anybody, if you're listening and you are struggling with anxiety, I need you to know, based on the science and based on my own experience and based on the promises of God, anxiety is resolvable. It is so healable. I do not suffer with anxiety anymore. Anxiety is not a part of my daily life. It's not the thing that is just always looming. And I will say, because I am a sensitive person and a creative person, when anxiety does show up for me, it doesn't bother me. It means that I'm growing. It's like, and it doesn't have the same like terror charge. Anxiety feels completely different to me now. It's like, oh, I noticed this feeling. There's like a little bit of worry in my system, or like, oh, a little feeling of doom in my system. Like, I wonder what's going on. And I have the tools now, which I want to share some to deal with it. But it accompanies growth spurts. It's not ever an actual it's never literal. It's never like an actual warning of something that's true or not. And I really want you guys to know that it is so possible to heal. So for me, 10 years ago, I was 31 years old, a precious new mom, got a lot of compassion for her. And I was as you guys know, my whole life was the church and leading worship. And I had a 4-year-old at the time, actually, it was 3 years old, and a brand new baby that was 3 months old. And out of the blue, one night, I had noticed that since the baby was born, obviously there was a lack of sleep and my hormones were out of control. And I was exhausted, but there was something I just kind of felt off. And I remember just thinking like, oh, gosh, I just gotta like get a good night's sleep and shake it off and get in a routine and all of the things that, are good for you. But um, in the middle of the night, I had my first panic attack, and I had unending panic attacks after that point because I had no idea what was happening to myself. So it's like I had the fear, but then I also had the fear of the fear. And so I had like anxiety about my anxiety and level 10. I mean, it was terror. I remember asking the nurse, "Can you die of fear?" That's how terrified I was. And I went to the hospital in the middle of the night. It would have been maybe 24 hours of panic. I went to the hospital. And of course, it was so scary. And again, if you notice anxiety in you right now as you hear this, because these are the kind of stories that would give me anxiety, I really want you to know that, first of all, you know, the hospital was able to identify immediately, like, this is postpartum anxiety, like, you just need to get some sleep, which did not help me in the moment, but it was just the fear of the fear. And I want you to know that I'm completely okay and safe, and it is very possible to heal, just in case you have panic attacks. Um, I haven't had an actual panic attack in so long, but basically, after that point, everything changed in my life, and would not have been able to know it at the time, but I was invited into healing, into a real healing journey. And I think that big artists and creatives have a tendency to over spiritualize and make spiritual meaning out of everything, but I just want to biologically let you know what anxiety is. And it's just your nervous system um sensing threat where there is no threat. If there was a threat, it wouldn't be anxiety, it would be healthy fear. So anxiety is the feeling that something is wrong. And that feeling, for a lot of us, started in childhood. And if you think about 20 and 30, 40, 50 maybe years ago, our parents did not have the information on even healthy attachment was new science at that point. And bonding and developmental emotional needs. Most of our parents, especially if you were raised in any kind of religious upbringing, our parents were focused on obedience and discipline and routines. And that was just because that was the literature on parenting at the time. So a lot of us little kids that are adults now, we did have a sense that something was wrong. Now, I've talked about this in other episodes, but like, what about other generations? Why didn't they deal with anxiety as much? And a lot of that has to do with the pace that life is, that human, life evolution, how we have evolved just in technology, is far beyond what the human body knows how to fully process. So to our body, all this exciting technological advances is just a lot of extra threat. And so combined with unresolved childhood fear, we have an explosion of anxiety and depression in this generation. And I think while can be daunting to think about, I actually think it's a really beautiful thing that is happening, or we're being invited to. This is like mass collective level emotional healing, especially with the research and the science that's coming out around how to heal and what anxiety is. So anxiety is just your nervous system sensing threat. If you have this feeling that something is wrong from childhood and no one is with you to talk you through that when it comes up, then that is a way that your nervous system learns to just view the world like something is wrong. And then you combine it with access to full-time media and news and constant bad news that we've had growing access to over our most of our lives, if you're listening to this, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, combined with new threats that we experience in all kinds of ways. Social fear is a real thing to your biology, and that's like being left out, being bullied, getting into fights, having broken hearts, relationship issues, combined with figuring out adulthood with this sense that something's wrong, and then getting, bad news, or not getting the job you need, or all of the different things that can happen in the human life. Obviously, my experience is a very Western experience, and speaking to those like me, there are different cultural experiences of being a human in different parts of the world. But I'm speaking to, this Western experience of most of us had access to food and shelter growing up. And it was the lack of attunement from our parents, knowing when we were sad, knowing how to talk to us, being regulated themselves, being resolved in their own nervous systems themselves. It was the lack of that led us to be in bodies that just felt like, gosh, something is just wrong. And you're not wrong. Like, something was wrong with that. But the problem is, without knowing that those are the issues, those are the root issues that cause anxiety, then your brain just starts to apply it to present day. Like, what is wrong? Is it my marriage? Do I need to get a divorce? Did I miss out? Did I pick the wrong person? Or is there a God? Is that what's wrong? Is that there's no God? Because you know what? That makes sense. You can't prove God. Like, is that it? Or am I in the wrong career? In the wrong city? Oh my gosh. Am I at the wrong, did I pick the wrong career and I should have done something different long ago? I'm trying to think of all the anxiety spikes. Do I have a terminal illness? Is there something wrong with me? Am I terminally ill and I'm dying? Is that what's wrong? And your brain's not talking to you like that. It's not like asking you questions like, Courtney, is this what's wrong? Maybe it's this. It's also not saying, you know what? I'm remembering some pain from my childhood that I'd really love to talk about. Is there any way that we could talk about it? Because I feel kind of afraid. Your brain's not going to talk to you like that. It only knows what it's feeling, and it's trying to make sense of what it's feeling, but applying it to your present day life. That's why you have these intrusive thoughts. That's why you have these constant, fears and ruminations about what terrible things could happen, or maybe terrible things that you could do. None of that is real. It's all just what you're afraid of. And it's all just these worst case scenarios that your brain is trying to rehearse in case it could actually happen, so you'll be prepared. And all of that is anxiety's way of trying to protect you from what it feels like could be wrong. So for me, my journey was going back to the places that then the memories and the little girl inside of me that always was the, I don't know, canary in the coal mine, I guess, or maybe just overly sensitive. I don't really believe in oversensitivity, but highly sensitive. The one that could sense when people were mad at each other, the one that could sense when, parents were worried, or when the adults were angry at each other, or, the one that felt highly sensitive to bullying or teasing or feeling left out. But without parents, and I love my parents, but without parents who knew or felt fully comfortable or equipped to walk me through my own emotions, the only sense I was left with was that something was wrong. And so my invitation was to go back to those places. And this is the amazing thing about trauma resolution, is we can calm our bodies with somatic practices, with understanding our nervous system, regulating our nervous system. And we use our imagination to bring ourselves new memories. And if you think that sounds crazy, or that's fake, that's not even real, the truth is, your body doesn't know what's real or imagined when you use your 5 senses to close your eyes and imagine a really safe place for that little kid. What you're actually doing is you're giving yourself a gift. You are giving yourself the gift of rewiring some of your neural pathways around home and family and parents and safety. And you're reshaping, you're giving your nervous system a chance to reshape, because you're basically going back to the little kid that felt like something is wrong. And you're giving them solid ground. You're giving them safety. You're letting them know that you see them and you hear them, and that they're not, that something was wrong, but it was just the fact that you were alone in your sadness and fear, and nothing big, dark, terrible, and scary is real and is going to get you. And that's really important work to do. And I did it for a really long time. Mostly because I was really, I got a little bit stuck in my emotional processing, and it took me a while to understand that the nervous system regulation was a huge, huge part, because this is how it works. If you are trying to go into these memories, but your body feels terrified, then what you're doing is you're just re-traumatizing yourself. I had a client that talked about, like, I've done inner child work, but it felt terrible. If inner child work feels terrible, you're doing it wrong. Inner child work, and if it does feel terrible, you probably need to go a lot slower and work with somebody that you feel really safe with, that can tend to your pace. This is the work that I do with clients, is really paying attention to their capacity and their pace, because sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And when you're terrified, and your physical biological body is terrified, you can't go back to those younger parts of you. You can't go back and give yourself peace and calm. You have to help your body feel a little bit safer, and then use your imagination, which, is still brave work. It's a very brave work. But then you can use your imagination to actually bring healing, loving memories. And it's a really, really beautiful thing. It should feel a little bit like relief every time that you're able to really be with your younger self. And if not, it just means that your body is really scared. And that's when we want to, sometimes I'll suggest that people do these, like, imagine being with your younger child, just like maybe even from a distance, just like imagine what that would feel like if your little kid felt safe. What would be an ideal day for your little kid? Or for the little kid that you were, who would have been a safe person? I remember one of the first people that I imagined being with myself. I actually think I have an episode on this too, with Anthony Bulliatane in season 1, talking about, like, the safe people that we've brought in. And it's helpful when you bring in a safe person that you kind of have seen is an actual safe person in your real life. You could make someone up, of course, but, like, I always thought Bob Goff was, like, the safest person. I've met him a few times. I've emailed him a few times, back and forth, and he's wonderful. Sorry, let me say that again. One time I led worship for him, and I remember right before we led worship, or actually right after we led worship, he said, before he went on to speak, he said, "Do you guys have a bucket?" And it was me and someone else. And we were like, "We could find a bucket." He was like, "How do you guys feel about going out and washing some cars?" So basically, me and Bob Goff and my friend Christian, we walked out to the parking lot and we washed cars with Bob Goff, and he told us stories about his life for like a half an hour. And I just remember thinking it was, like, brilliant, like one of the greatest moments of my life. And I just imagined him to be such a safe kind of, like, uncle, grandpa, father. So I would use my imagination to imagine him just being with my younger self, being like, "Hey, it's okay." And that over time, and when I brought in somatic practices that I could do to help myself feel safer, um, lightened the load, the heaviness of the anxiety and the shame and the depression that I felt. And it's such worthy work. And I just want to remind any of you struggling with anxiety, something that was an issue for me was intrusive thoughts, like really wild and dark and icky, like flashes of thought. Um, and I think that might technically be on like an OCD spectrum. It was sort of a season for me. It's not like an issue for me, but it's not an issue for me now. But if you struggle with intrusive thoughts, I just want you to know right now, they are never literal. Never. They're always your subconscious showing you what the worst case scenario is for you. Always. And what your subconscious is trying to do by showing you what your worst case scenario is over and 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 over again is it's trying to just tell you that you're very scared. And so it's hard to unhook from those intrusive thoughts, but it's vital to do so. Cheryl Paul is always the resource that I lead people to for intrusive thoughts. And it's something that I work with clients on too, understanding and decoding your intrusive thoughts, but really with the understanding that all they're doing is showing you what you are most afraid of. And when you can actually look at what you're most afraid of straight in the face, it loses a lot of that charge, becomes more neutral, and then you can kind of just deal with the little kid underneath who's sort of freaked out. So, I want to share all this just because I want you guys to know very simply that anxiety is healable, but more than that, everything is healable. There's nothing in your life that you can't make peace with and resolve. There's nothing that you are going through that can't be used for your own growth, for your own strength building, for your own transformation. And the reason why I bring up the 10 years thing in the beginning of this episode is because what I was just thinking about this week was if I were to go back to that 31-year-old and let her know the life that I'm living now, it's emotional to think about because I would have been able to tell her that anxiety is not an issue, that I was able to find beautiful answers on what was actually going on with me. I would probably sit right next to her and hold her right in the emergency room and let her know you are okay. And this is really hard, but I'm not scared of it. I'm not scared of it at all. And whoever's listening, I am not scared of your anxiety. And I would invite you to find the part of you that is not scared of it either, because there is a part of you inside that is not scared of it. And I don't believe that pathology is always helpful, that diagnosis that, oh, that's just going to be what you're going to have to deal with your whole life. I was given a lot of different diagnoses around my anxiety and depression and PTSD that just had a lot of maybe not warnings, but advice about how to cope with it for the rest of my life, just knowing this is just always going to be an issue. And I knew every time I was given a diagnosis like that there was so much more to the story and that was not going to be my story. Even though I was like drowning in panic and anxiety, I still was like, no, I'm going to heal. I would say I'm going to heal so effing hard. That's what I would write in my journal. And it worked and it works. And we live in an amazing time right now. I mean, there's so many ways to heal, you guys. Pay attention to what is highlighted to you as far as what your next step is. Because there are so many ways to heal, you can't do them all at once, nor would you want to. And you're not going to find the one thing that is, or maybe a better way to say it is, there's not only one way to heal. And if you find that you are not healing using the modality, or your anxiety doesn't feel like it's relieving, that it's resolving, that it's lessening, you don't feel more energy, you don't feel more hope for the future, then I would say ask yourself, ask God, okay, what's the next step for me? It doesn't mean that it's getting worse. It doesn't mean that you're headed for doom. It doesn't mean that. It just means, I remember I would ask myself, like, I think this is a Lisa Nichols quote, but she would say, if I'm doing everything that I know to do and I still feel this way, there must be something I don't know. And that was my kind of stake in the ground as far as like, I'm not giving in here. I'm not just going to say, okay, this is just how it is. I'm just going to deal with this my whole life, because I do believe in the body's ability to heal. I think that God made us inside of these beautiful self-healing systems that want to heal. Anxiety is your body trying to tell you that it's scared. It wants to heal. It wants to find comfort and safety and resolve. And so pay attention to what the next thing might be for you. Inner child work was essential. And, I made a post on this on Instagram, but, for people saying like inner child work is so weird. Yeah, it's also weird to be a child that didn't get your needs met. It's kind of amazing that we have the science to know that we can use our imaginations to be with that little child. Nervous system regulation, understanding that there are actual physical exercises that you can do, like box breathing, like tapping, going for a walk. And a million other things. Look at the NeuroFit app that you can do that build on each other, that help you feel safe. I would tell this version of myself 10 years from now, like, don't worry. All of these things, all these questions are going to get answered. All of these, you're going to learn what you need to learn, and you are going to be okay. If you feel like you're at the beginning of your 10-year journey, it didn't take me 10 years to heal. I wouldn't even use that language. We've all been growing. But I would just say, if you were at the beginning of your 10 years, the most important thing that you can give yourself is self-compassion, deep self-compassion for your journey, knowing and just tell yourself, I will never abandon you. I will never abandon you. I've got you. We'll figure it out. We will figure it out. And let that be the absolute commitment. That's the commitment that I would have made to myself 10 years from now. 10 years ago, I would have let her know, I've got you. And I think that this part of me that feels so unafraid in the face of anyone's mental challenges, emotional illness, emotional challenges, is that I'm not afraid of this, that you absolutely can overcome this. You can absolutely resolve this. And then on top of that, you get to build the life that you want. You get to build the life that you dream of, the life that you know God created you for. And that's pretty miraculous. And what's also beautiful about being a trauma survivor is, gosh, there's not much that can mess with you once you really learn to walk through this. There's not much that you can face that freaks you out, because you know it's all for your growth and your healing. There's not much you can't get through. Nothing. There's nothing that you can't get through. So if that's you, I just want to bless you and let you know that this can be your story too. It absolutely can. Pay attention to what kind of support you might need next, and be so deeply compassionate on yourself. I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.